Alright, so when you're going in to analyze data for ESOL, the first thing to do is to find all the EAM-profs of students who are not listed as a 9. When you find those students, you'll have a list like that. More effectively would be to click the Advanced button, because we're going to add some more to that. So whenever you get to that screen, click on Advanced first, and then what it'll do is show you the students at the top here, the 2407 at this point, who are have an EAM-prof other than 9, which catches most of the students in our program. So I'll click the Set button, and what that will do is allow us to add more students when we also check for home language that is not equal to blank. So I'm going to search that. It gives us another group of students. From there, I'm going to click the word Add, and that's going to add from our 2407 now up to 2448. So a couple of students added there. Just trying to make sure that we don't miss anybody. And the last thing I do is first language spoken not equal to blank, which not equal to is just a hashtag sign, then leave 2 spaces for blank. That gives us more students. I scroll down, and again, I click Add, so 2448 now becomes 2452. And now we have the students who are all potentially in our program or need to be edited in some way or need to be figured out what to do with them. So I click Quick Export. And I've already got loaded in the list of all the things that, all the fields that we would want to code for in ESOL and to look up and edit or just view. And so you can find that list by email and other places. When I get to this screen, I usually click Surround Fields, column titles on the first row, and then from there I click Submit, and that will create a file that I'm going to use to create an Excel spreadsheet to actually go in to analyze all the data. Alright, so once you have your file, it's going to create it like on a notebook file. You copy and paste that into Excel and do all your formatting as you prefer to do, however you're doing this. What I like to do, of course, is go ahead and save the document first to a file where I keep all my documents and all my data. I usually call it R2 Big Pull, the date and whatever needs to go on. So today I'm trying to make sure things are updated for the end of the year to be fixed. I also put a gray row for the first row with all the descriptions and the headings. I put my column and row lines in. I size it to view. So some of the columns, basically from like rows I all the way over, you have data at different sizes and different things can be input. So it can be complicating to move things around. So I just shrink it to fit in the Format tab to help me maneuver through the data a little bit easier. I also rename certain lines, like for example, I cut off a few things, like this said something else than waiver, and so I cut off a few words sometimes, and this used to say something else than EAM-prof. I cut off things so teachers can see it more easily, but again, that's really just sort of a preference thing. So all the columns you see, we have the school, student ID, last name, first name, the grade, which includes all of our pre-K kids at the top of every time we do a big pull. Sometimes we'll need to do a little bit with them, and sometimes we can kind of get rid of them from the data to make it less confusing if not needed. Date of birth, English proficiency code is there. If the student is waived, and of course if the EAM-prof code is W, this waiver needs to also be checked. It'll come out as a number 1, or if it's not, it'll be a 0. Then you have all the language categories. We have our first language spoken, the state version. Then we have our first language spoken, that's our Richland 2 version, to make sure we don't have any blanks or anything that says other. For example, this student is other, and the other is Punjabi. So we want to make sure we know what all the other languages are. Here's our primary language field from the state. Here's our home language field from the state. and then our home language field from Richland 2. So again, we can see what other means. So here in this case, other means Bengali. So it helps us to understand who our kids are. The next field is about correspondence languages. It's just a little checkbox, either 1 or a 0. Not important that that data is really there. We just use it as a reference. Then the two fields on the ESOL page from the state called oral communication language and written communication language. Those are here to help us know which parents need information sent home to them in a language other than English. So usually at the beginning of the year, we'll send a big list to every school to let them know who at their school, per the annual registration every year, wants a language other than English for oral or written communication. It helps us with translators and interpreters. Next is ethnicity, for reference and data collection. Then we basically have the place where we put in the 30-day notification, what date that was sent home. Should be there every year. We'll redo that every year. Next two columns are dealing with Title III immigrant status. So we include the student's birthplace, which is a keyed-in field that the school data coordinator can key in. For example, Columbia, South Carolina, Kylie, Texas, Bamayan, which is in Puerto Rico. So they can put whatever they want to there. And we use that to help us with the next two fields, which are birth country and U.S. entry date. And so notice the student who was born in Bamayan, Puerto Rico, the code for Puerto Rico is ZZ999. It's a random code the State Department puts together. This other student here is Daegu, probably from Korea, so the code for Korea is KR410. And then we have the date when the student entered. It's important for us to make sure that if a student is born in Colombia that doesn't have anything for the birth country or the entry date, or if the student is born somewhere else outside of the United States or in a U.S. territory, as is the case here, it'll have the territory or the city or state or wherever they were born, followed by the country code or territory code, followed by the date of entry. And a U.S. Entry date of less than 3 years would make a child a Title III immigrant. The next column we've got is return to U.S. schools. And so if a student was born in the United States but left the United States to go to a home country or other place around the world but has come back, we would want to it'd be a marking here for that student. It's a very rare case. And then the next column would be the re-entry date, whereby they came back to the country. So the State Department can kind of flag a student who, even though they were born here, we expect them to be maybe higher progress-wise, but maybe they're not because they've not been in our schools except for maybe 1 year. So that's how the State Department keeps up with that data. And then the next field is called PREV level, which basically just means the ESOL level. It's a bad name, but that's what it means. This is A1, A2, B1, B2, etc. So we're basically getting into now the columns that are all dealing with things that we have, for the most part, on our ESOL pages that we want to have to be able to reference and use if we need to for students. So the ESOL level is here, followed by minutes of service. And if I wanted to simplify this title there, I could just click like that to make it easier to read. This is the year, making sure that the teachers have documented every year that they've updated the placement. The next column, we mark the instructional setting, which is special education, 504 resource. That's often very good for us to know next to that level so we can know how a student's being served and other programs. Then this is the field for a long-term L. That would be a checkbox, yes or no, kind of a 1 or 0. More information about LTELs here, an explanation of the placement. So those are all the things that will be found on the ESOL placement tab. And then we're going to get into all of the other State Department data dealing with the initial placement of when a student came in to the program. So let me scroll down and try to find an example. Here we go. And also, by the way, I usually freeze the top row in order for you to be able to scroll down and see everything at the top row still. So here's a student who took the WAPT, and then we put the date in which they enrolled in Richland 2. This is revised. Richland 2 for that testing date, and then the next is basically what their score was, a truncated score from 1 to 6. So you notice the student scored 1, for example. And that's going to allow us to keep up with the data for when a student first came, so we'll know how the student will be classified when they get into their cohort for the state report card, what year they'll be and what progress they need to make on access in order to keep moving through our system. The next many columns here are all dealing with things we have on the ESOL intake form. Prior academic language, limited formal schooling, their composite level when they entered, the SOLOM test if that was given, or old tests like the Woodcock, pre-loss, AIMS, if the Spanish Woodcock was administered, any scoring that we need to put down. Usually that's for the kindergarten WAP. We put information for the K WAP in there. Was the student served previously? Were they previously retained? What's the recommendation level that we're going to place them at when they first come into our district? What date was that? What teacher did that placement? And then we want to also make sure that we know if the student was age appropriate, if they were age appropriately placed or not. And then after that, we have a couple of fields dealing with communication. So we have home phone, mother's home phone, mailing address, zip code, a few things like that. Also emails and things like that. The last column on the very end I put is for the 9GR, for the 9th grade code. That's important only for high schoolers, helping us know how long a student has been in U.S. schools in order to know if they're going to be able to graduate in the normal 4 years or if they'll be taking more time to graduate. One thing that's important to do at the very beginning of the process of looking at data is to take care of your pre-K and your 3K kids, because basically there's very little information we need to put for them. I've already gone ahead and flagged the only errors that really we need to worry about, which are students who have an INGPROF that's not listed as a 1. So any student, for example, here at the top, any student who is with a home language of Spanish or French or whatever else, or a first language or a primary language that's other than English, the only thing we need to do for our pre-K and 3K kids is just make their INGPROF a 1, just kind of flagging them for the future. So notice here that a couple of kids are missing the 1, they just have a 9, so I'm just going to alert the ESOL teacher to tell the SDC they need to update that student. And that's really all we need to do for them. And what I would do is just kind of copy all of the pre-K and 3K kids, put them on a different sheet as to not lose them, but just kind of take them off record because we don't really consider them part of our program yet. So now what we need to do is start looking at our data and kind of piecing through things, sorting things in different ways to find irregularities, to find where our teachers or school data coordinators need to edit information or change information or add information to make sure that all our students are correctly datafied, if I can make up a new word. I've currently just resorted by school to get rid of some extraneous information, because sometimes at the bottom you'll see a couple of lines of data that didn't format correctly for some reason I never can figure out. But I just get rid of data that doesn't actually connect with the student. But the next thing I want to do is sort smallest to largest for INGPROF, just to see how that looks. So we're going to rank it from 1 to 6, then it'll go into other things. And so as I scroll down the page, you'll see the numbers ascending in order, and then we have a big chunk here of 9s. And so I know that there's going to be errors there, because if a student is listed as a 9, they're not going to be, they're not supposed to be in our program. So this student has Spanish as their language for home language and also for first language. And I'm noticing their recent entry date. So my guess is this is a newer student who we just haven't changed the INGPROF for yet. So I'm going to flag that. And so I won't do this while you're watching because it'll take too long, but I will just basically go sort of line by line through the nines and make sure that I code any errors for ones that are that should not be nines. Then it's going to go into our former L's, our foreign exchange students, and our never L's. And those students should all be on our list as D1s. I'll do a check on those. And then after I go down, I'll see all my proficiency scores of P1 through 4, those that have gained proficiency. I'll make sure that those are verified. And then our next chunk will be the INCPROFs of W, all the waivers. And then what I'll make sure there is that all the waivers have the 1, which means the yes checkbox next to it. So every W should have a 1 next to it. And there shouldn't be any 1s next to things that aren't W. So in this case, all the W's have 1, so that's good. And then we'll notice here too that I have some students at the bottom of the document who have a missing INCPROF. In this case, I see that all 5 of these students don't have any language categories other than English, so I'm just going to delete them because they're not in our program, trusting that the school data coordinator will just take care of them later. And then there's 4 more here at the bottom, deleting them because they are not in our program. The school data coordinator can go back in and put a 9 for them later, but we don't take that on as a responsibility. But I do see one student here I'm going to flag in red who is missing an INCPROF. Again, a brand new student who's come to us, but the school hasn't put in their INCPROF yet, so I'm going to flag that. So what I'll do next, after I've taken a look at the INCPROFs and found the ones that are glaringly wrong and marked them in red, I've hidden a few columns to make it easier to see, but I'm going to be comparing the INCPROF column, which now is here G, to the column X, which here is the ESOL level. We're talking A1, A2 sort of thing. So these 3 columns are important for me to look at. I want to make sure that all my teachers have put in something for this year, so currently 18-19 with minutes of service, and then the level should be there, and that should match up accordingly to an INCPROF that would make sense for that level. So an INCPROF of 1 and A1 level makes sense. And so what I'll do is give you the basic idea. I'll just scroll down until I find the next group of students, which is going to be the A2s, making sure that their minutes of service is there and the year, and that their INCPROF code matches up. In this case, it's a 1.0, which again is reasonable. And so what I'll do is just go all the way down my list, looking at all the levels, comparing those with INCPROFs to try to find some errors. I'll try to find a few issues. Usually when we have students that are getting up to the B1 and B2 level, we shouldn't see any more level 1 scores you would anticipate. Usually if the student is level A1, we shouldn't see a score up in the 3s and the 4s for INCPROF because that doesn't sort of make sense with where the student's level. So sometimes I'll flag that. Notice that I have a few that are here flagged in blue because the year was not updated. So I know there's something to go and to look there. So I do blue for you, which is the color for the ESOL t-shirt to search for. One issue, when I see a waiver, I should see a W over here. In this case, I don't. So I'm just going to highlight in blue and in blue here to sort of key them in that there's some kind of error. Because if the student is a waiver, they should not have a number. And if a student is a waiver, for this case example, it should say waiver. So if a W is on this side, the B1 waiver should be on this side. So this one looks correct. So that's why I'm going to flag the one that looks odd. So waiver issues are something to look for. Here you see we have some B2s and the score level of 1. But notice that they're all kindergartners. So that's helpful for me to see that the reason why they're listed as 1 is because all kindergartners are listed as level 1, no matter what their level of proficiency is. So I'm going to scroll down, and what I want to start doing as I get farther down the list is make sure that my INCPROFs, as we get into the move between numbers to letters, I want to make sure those are all correct. So I got up to 5.3, still a B2, so those are looking correct. Got my errors I've already flagged here. Notice all my W's, I have a line of W's here. Those should all say waiver here, so that's correct. Looks like our teachers have done a good job on that. Then I have my B3s coming next. It'll be Could be any number of things that a B3 student has, all the way up through 6.0. But as I get to the bottom of the B3s, everything's looking pretty good. I might notice some issues as we get to the bottom. So notice that I've already flagged 4 students whose EngProf codes are a 9, and they should be definitely something else. The CM means composite missing. That should only be a case for special ed students. I see here the special ed is marked, so that's okay. That means their access score wasn't completely finished. I see an error here because I see 2 P1 students, but it says that their proficiency, their ESOL level is B3. You can't be a B3 and a P1. If you're a P1, you should be a C1. Or if you're a B3, you should have a score in the 1 through 6 category. I see a couple of waivers here. That's okay. And now, again, I see some errors. And when you sort, you're going to notice errors at the transitions for the most part. So I have a couple of students here that are listed as 1s or 6s, but their ESOL level is marked as a C1. So there's definitely some kind of issue there. Either the error is with the ESOL level on this side for our ESOL teacher to fix, or the issue is with the EngProf, and we're going to need to go in and figure out what's going on there. Let's see. And then as I get into my P1s, proficiency 1s, I should see all C1s. And so at this point I am seeing that. So I'm going to scroll down. Since I'm sorted by the ESOL code, the C1 will be the one that's listed there. And so I'm going to go back and make sure that my last P1 is my last C1. It is. And my first P2 is my first C2, correct? So my teachers have done a great job keying this information in correctly. And that's why we're doing this as a data sort to make sure there are no mistakes as we go down. So scrolling through the C2s and the P2s to get to that edge. And I do notice here that there are some P3s, 3 P3s, but it says here that they're C2s. So either the P is incorrect or the C. Usually at this time of the year, I'll go back in and check, and I'll tell the teacher what's wrong, just to kind of save them some time. But in some cases, it's an easy fix for the teacher to go back in and figure out, based on when the kid passed access, what level they should be. And my guess here is, since these are all second graders, that the P3 is potentially correct, and the C2 should actually be a C3. And so I keep going through my list just like that. For brevity's sake, I'll skip the C3 work and the C4 work, and then I'll get down to the Ds. I'll go back and do that later after the screenshot video. I got to check to make sure that my 8s, so my EngProf 8s, which now says former L, never L, or foreign exchange, are updated here. So that should say D1, former L, and then whatever year. And the years don't have to be updated once a student turns to D because they're done. D1 is done. So I'll go down and scan for all my 8s to make sure that those line up correctly. I'll then get down to towards the bottom of the page where I'll probably start seeing some errors again. And here I see, looks like a student may have come back. There's an error there. And then a couple of students down here at the bottom who just simply don't have anything filled in for them yet. Most likely these are brand new kids or kids that have been away from our district and returned. So I notice a bunch of high numbers suggesting a brand new student, so the teacher maybe just hasn't finished it yet. And then I see one student who looks like they have been here for a long time. My guess is maybe they've left our district and come back. And so that'll be something that I need to flag for the teachers to make sure that they know they need to look into that student and figure out what's going on. Because sometimes students do come back and they might sneak back in without us knowing. Down here at the very bottom, I've blacked out a few for some errors we've already looked at for the pre-K and 3K kids who had some EngProf errors. They don't need to have anything filled out for ESOL yet, for the level or anything, or also for the intake screen, so I just black those out to make it easier to read. And then down here at the end again, I see 3 students who just don't have anything listed in yet. I'm going to make sure I flag that for the teacher to input. So before we look into the language columns, 5 language columns, a couple quick notes on EngProf. If you have students who are in kindergarten, the EngProf has to be either a 1 if they're served, or a P1 if they're exited. There's no other options for kindergartners. All other grades could be any number of different ink profs. Also to mention, if you have a kid who has any languages other than English listed on any of these 5 columns we have, it's going to be very important that we have a non-9 ink prof. If they have a 9 for ink prof, something is wrong, because if there's a language other than English, there should be something, even if only an 8 something, for their ink prof. All right, so going into looking at students' languages, oftentimes I will sort A to Z, and what I'm looking for here is to make sure, especially that other languages are listed, because the State Department only has a certain number of languages that they call for, and they have a column called Other. And I notice here, for all my others, I want to make sure that there's a field next to it filled in where I'll be able to know what that other means. So in most cases I'm seeing things look pretty good, and I'll go back and do all the details later, of course, but there are a few situations where I see a blank for other, and in this next column I also see one there. So sparing you all the details, what I'm going to do for languages is sort alphabetically for first language, and then language of the district, and then home language and our language for the district, to make sure that all the others are listed with something besides other, so we actually know what that student is. It's also a good time to check to make sure your ink profs match up. If there's a language besides English, that there's a non-9 ink prof listed for those. So that's how you do the language part. So last few notes on language issues. Sometimes you'll see a student here, for example, that has no languages listed, but they have an ink prof. There's some other error as well, but we want to make sure that we have at least one non-English language listed if the student is indeed in our program. So we need to go back, check the home language survey, see if there's an error made. And one student I see here, it's listed at Liberian. Standard English is her language. So in this category, we want to put other, have the SDC put other, because we consider some non-standard Englishes as students who could be benefited by our program. So a student being born in Liberia and is being served as an A2 in our program, we just need to have an other language listed there to make sure that we are correctly coded. Okay, let's move on to the 5 columns that deal with Title III immigrant status. Those are going to be student birthplace, which is a reference for us. We don't really add or edit it, but it's just a good reference and check. The country of birth for the State Department, and the U.S. entry date for the State Department. The other 2 are issues which are very rare. If a student is born in the United States but leaves and spends a significant amount of time outside the States for education and comes back, we need to have codes here, and then the date they came back right there. But in most cases, what I've done here is alphabetized searched the birthplace, which can kind of just make things a little easier to read. And then what I'm going to do now is scan down the column for birth country, and all these codes here. For example, AE 784 stands for the Arab Emirates, United Arab Emirates. So the student was born in Abu Dhabi. Their first entry date to US was 8/19/2010. And so all that information is completely fine. Everything looks good there. So as I scroll down, what I'm looking for is to certify that the birthplace, the country of birth, and that there's a date there. If there's a date missing, I'm going to flag that. If there's a country missing and a date there, I'm going to flag that. Just making sure that things line up. And you'll notice that with the birthplace, there's a lot of flexibility. It could say the city they were born in, it could say the country, it could say the city and the country, it could say nothing. But if it says Korea, for example, KR410 with a date, we're going to assume that's correct. We're never going to go back and edit anything missing in the birthplace. It's just a reference for us to use. So as I'm scrolling down, I'm seeing, of course, a lot from Mexico, Philippines, and then when we get down to the very bottom, we'll start seeing the ZZs, which are provinces or areas of the United States that we aren't technically states, but the State Department still wants to know where they are. And it looks like here everyone's done really great, because student born in Puerto Rico got the right code, got a date there, everything looks good. And then from here, what I'll do is just scroll down to make sure that all the locations for birthplace are places in the United States. Brooklyn, Charleston, Chicago, Columbia, SC. I just want to make sure real quickly that there's none listed for any other foreign places. And usually a quick scan, since I've already alphabetized it, is pretty easy to do. And then I'm just going to go through and check on that. And here is one example of a student who is a good case to bring up for the other two columns, which are usually blank for the most part. This student was born in Mecklenburg, North Carolina, so therefore this is blank for the code because they were born in America, and the U.S. entry date is blank because they were born here. But the student apparently has returned from overseas, where they maybe lived with their family, whether it's Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, whatever. So did they return to U.S. schools? The number is 1, which means yes. And then the date they came back was 8/22/18. So notice that this student is an A2 and listed as an ink prof of 2, which both make sense. So this student is an 11th grader who was born in the States, but has only come recently to the United States to study. So that's what that extra 2 fields for here, for return school and return entry date. That's what it would look like, and that's a good sample. All right, so the next thing I've done, and this is kind of the final check for the ESOL teachers, and I've actually already gone in and done it. I shrink the columns down for all the fields that are representing the ESOL intake screen, and then I go back and highlight all the students who have arrived from the age of when we moved to this system, which is basically when the kids' numbers move from very long 7-9 numbers to shorter 5-digit numbers. And then if a student is served or exited, the teacher should have done the intake form. And if they haven't, I just highlight the whole line all the way across. And it looks like there's a couple things here and there that might be filled in, but what I'm just basically doing is alerting them by the blue line that it looks like there's information missing on that page, so go back and verify it. Down here, for example, there is some information on that screen, but not enough. It doesn't tell me the teacher, and there's some missing data that could be input in there. So I'm just alerting them to the fact that there's something that needs to be done. And usually what I do after that is just, since we don't really need all those fields, I just shrink down some of the columns so that there's just less to deal with for them to have to see. So I'll hide some of the columns. So it still gives them enough to alert them that something's missing, and I'll make a note of that in my email when I send it to them. And another new field that we have new this year is the parent 30-day notification. And I've already gone ahead and done this. I've narrowed the students down to the dates of if any kid has this put in already, it should be good for the year. And then any student that's missing, I've highlighted all the students where the teacher has not sent out has not put into the system through the school data coordinator the date when the 30-day notification of placement form was required to be sent out by. The date is there, and it can be an approximate date if need be. But that should be there for any student who's served and taking access. And it can also be there for the students who have just exited into C1 if they pass access. Their date for them getting that parent letter should be in there. New fields, it looks like we got some teachers that haven't coded that in yet. So at this point, we've looked through all the data, analyzed it, found trends, and of course, we can't find every mistake here, but we can definitely find issues of need and what was missing across the district, and maybe things that might just be errors or might not be errors, but we want to flag the teachers to let them know what to do. So at this point, what I've done is cut a few columns that aren't necessary for me to share with teachers right now, just to kind of bring it down a little bit, although it's still a lot of data on this form. I've alphabetized it by IngProf and then by school. So the first school, 69, is Spring Valley. Spring Valley, when they get their document, which what we'll do is cut each school individually and give it to the teachers that school needs the work done to make sure we don't have data being shared to more people than it needs to be shared with. And what Spring Valley will do is take their data, find the spots on here where there are red or blue marks, and read over the email that I will send in accompaniment with this document for them to know what they need to do to fix the problems, to find solutions, or to come back and ask us questions to see what needs to be done. At the end of the school year, there shouldn't be as many issues, but there are definitely some sites, like this school, for example, that needs to do all of their 30-day notification replacement forms. That was never done, it looks like, so making sure that that gets done. Searching for trends, things like that can help us out. And after that, I'm going to create a really detailed email to send to all the teachers so they kind of know what to be looking for, some of the highlights, due dates, who to talk to, who to do what, to make sure they can understand what part they have to play in the process of making sure that our data is correct.